The silence was absolute, save for the soft hum of the old ceiling fan. Emily sat at the edge of her father's hospice bed, gripping his withered hand as the final breath slipped from his lips. "I never told you the truth," he whispered, his eyes full of regret. Then, nothing. No tears came, just a hollow ache that clawed at her ribs. A fracture cracked through her world, splintering every childhood memory she clung to. For years she'd lived with questions: why her mother vanished when she was 8, why her father drowned himself in silence. Now, with death's curtain drawn, the truth lay behind it, locked forever. Emily stood up, numb, her father's words haunting her like a riddle from a dream. The air felt heavier, her breath short, like grief was pressing its palm against her chest. Her soul didn't cry, it screamed. A scream no one heard. Outside, the street hummed with indifferent life. Emily stepped into the cool evening, the door clicking shut behind her like the punctuation of fate. Her legs carried her forward, but her mind reeled backward, through years of silence, lonely birthdays, unanswered questions. Her fingers touched the pendant around her neck, a silver lotus her mother gave her the night she disappeared. "Protect your heart," her mother had said. But how? The world had taken everything sacred from her, leaving her a shell too hollow to echo. Her father's secret now joined the growing archive of unanswered whys. Emily passed flickering street lamps, barely noticing the city's rhythm. Her story had fractured at its spine, and she didn't yet know how to turn the page. Emily found herself on the train platform, though she couldn't recall the walk there. Trains roared past like memories she couldn't stop. A woman in a red coat brushed by her, and for a moment, Emily swore it was her mother. She turned, breath halted, but the woman was gone, swallowed by the crowd. Her grip tightened on the lotus pendant, pressing its sharp edge into her palm. The pain grounded her. Her thoughts spiraled. What truth had her father taken with him? Was her mother running from him, or from herself? The questions didn't just ache, they screamed. She closed her eyes, and in that moment, the sound of the arriving train blurred into the wind's howl. She had no direction, only wait. The apartment was dark when she returned. No one waiting. No one ever had. Her fingers grazed the walls as if touching memories, scratches where a photo frame once hung, a faded post-it still stuck to the fridge with a grocery list from weeks ago. She sat on the couch, unable to cry, unable to sleep. Her father's last words kept repeating like a mantra with no meaning. "I never told you the truth." What truth? Was her entire childhood a lie? The quiet apartment seemed to breathe around her, walls groaning under the weight of silence. Emily leaned back, eyes open, heart closed. She no longer feared the dark. It had lived inside her long before this night. Midnight bled into dawn, and Emily remained awake, eyes tracing the cracks in her ceiling. Memories arrived uninvited, her mother brushing her hair, her father laughing once long ago. Were any of them real? Or were they colored by a child's need for safety? She rose, barefoot on cold wooden floors, and opened the window. The city hadn't stopped breathing. She inhaled sharply. Her chest still hurt, but she was alive. Her pain hadn't killed her. Not yet. And beneath that pain was something quiet. Not peace, but possibility. She whispered into the wind. What now? The breeze offered no answer, only motion. Emily didn't go to work the next day. The world outside functioned like nothing had changed, but inside her, something had shifted. She sat at her small kitchen table, sipping cold coffee, staring at the same lotus pendant lying on the wood. "Protect your heart." Her mother's voice echoed again. But how do you protect what's already broken? She stared into the steamless cup, hoping for answers in silence. There had to be something more than this, more than the grief, the hollow routine, the quiet breaking of the soul. She picked up a worn book from the shelf, The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching, a gift she never opened. It had once belonged to her mother. Emily traced her fingers over the cover. Her mother found something in Buddhism. Maybe Emily could too, not salvation, but survival. She opened the book. Pages whispered like old ghosts. Her mother's handwriting filled the margins. Tiny notes, circled verses, pressed flowers. One line stood out. To transform suffering, we must first touch it. Emily let the words sit. She had spent her life avoiding pain, stuffing it into dark corners. But maybe she needed to let it breathe. She closed her eyes and imagined her mother sitting across from her. "You were always too brave for your own good," the memory said. Emily's jaw tightened. She didn't feel brave. She felt exhausted. Still, something began to loosen, just slightly. The book lay open like an invitation. She began to read, her fingers trembling as she turned the page. Somewhere in those lines, her mother's voice felt closer than it had in years. Later that afternoon, Emily sat cross-legged on the living room floor, the book still open beside her. She tried to meditate, just breathe and be still, but her mind was chaos. Her father's last words, her mother's vanishing, the unbearable silence between, every thought collided in waves. She opened her eyes, fists clenched. "This doesn't work," she whispered. But then she remembered the book's next line. "Even pain, when observed with patience, reveals wisdom." Her breathing slowed. She didn't have to silence her grief. She only had to meet it. She closed her eyes again, this time letting the ache rise without judgment. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not loud, not violent. Just there. She didn't wipe them away. That night, Emily dreamed. She was 8 again, standing in her childhood backyard beneath a cherry tree. Her mother stood across the grass, smiling gently. "You're holding too much," her mother said. Emily looked down. Her arms were full of broken things, toys, torn pages, cracked photos. "Put them down, Emily." Her child self hesitated, then slowly released the weight. The items fell and disappeared into the grass. Her mother opened her arms, but before Emily could run, the dream shattered. She woke up gasping. The room was quiet, but her chest wasn't tight for once. She sat up, breathing steadily. It had only been a dream, yet it felt more real than most of her life. Maybe her mother's truth lived not in answers, but in letting go. Emily woke before sunrise. She wrapped herself in a blanket and stepped onto the fire escape. The city below was beginning to stir, eerily buses groaning, bakery lights flicking on. She exhaled slowly, watching her breath cloud the air. A strange calm settled in her chest. Not peace, not yet, but something gentler than despair. She held the pendant in one hand, the book in the other. "I don't know how to heal," she murmured. "But I want to try." That desire, once buried under years of numbness, now rose like a flicker of flame. Her mother had left, yes. Her father had died with secrets. But maybe the path ahead wasn't in chasing their ghosts. Maybe it began right here, in stillness, in breath, in intention. The sun broke the horizon. Emily didn't move. She let the light find her. Emily sat across from her therapist, words coiled tightly behind her lips. "I thought I hated him," she finally said, voice raw. "But now, I don't even know what I feel." The therapist nodded gently, waiting. Emily's hands fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve. "I keep asking myself, why didn't I try harder? Why didn't I ask more questions when I had the chance?" Silence followed, not heavy, but charged. "You're not responsible for someone else's silence," the therapist replied. "But you are allowed to mourn the space it left in you." Emily looked down, her throat tight. She had spent so long trying to be strong that she forgot how to be human. To rage, to ache, to question. In this sterile room, her carefully built walls began to sweat. And a part of her, small but fierce, wanted to crumble. That night, Emily paced her apartment, unable to settle. The questions spun like crows inside her chest. She opened the drawer where her father's old journal had sat untouched. Flipping through pages of receipts and mundane entries, one section caught her breath. A torn page, dated 5 months before her mother vanished. "I told her everything," it read. "She said she couldn't stay and watch me rot." The ink trailed off. Emily dropped a book onto the table, her legs weak. It wasn't just her father who'd withheld truth, it was her mother too. Her image of both parents began to blur, their flaws rising to the surface like oil in water. Who had loved her honestly? Who had lied? Her tears came not from clarity, but from the collapse of simplicity. The next morning, she wandered aimlessly into a nearby Buddhist temple. It was quiet, sun pooling on the tiled floor like spilled honey. A monk greeted her with a nod, then returned to sweeping the steps. Emily sat near the altar, unsure what she was seeking. The statue of the Buddha didn't offer answers. It offered stillness. She stared into its calm face and whispered, "How do I forgive people who never asked for it?" Her voice didn't echo, but something inside her did. The monk approached slowly, offering tea without a word. She accepted. No sermon, no explanation, just presence. And in that space of sacred silence, she felt less alone than she had in years. Days blurred. Emily returned to the temple again and again, not for answers but for quiet. She watched the monks move, clean, chant. She sat for hours, sometimes just breathing, sometimes crying. One afternoon, a younger monk approached her gently. "Pain is not something to escape," he said softly. "It's something to sit with, to make tea for." Emily laughed bitterly through her tears. "Then I must have a whole dinner party going on." The monk smiled. "Then let it be a feast." She exhaled, surprised by her own laughter, by how it cracked open something inside her. The temple didn't fix her. It didn't need to. It reminded her that she didn't have to run. Emily stood by the temple gate, ready to leave. She bowed slightly, not out of ritual, but out of respect. For the place, for the silence, for herself. Her steps back into the city were slower. Not hesitant, deliberate. The world was still loud, chaotic, and indifferent. But something inside her had shifted. The rage had softened into grief, and the grief had started turning into space. Not emptiness, room. She passed the same train station where she'd once hallucinated her mother in a red coat. This time the crowd moved, and she did not search for her. She let it all pass. As she reached for the lotus pendant around her neck, she realized for the first time, it wasn't a symbol of abandonment. It was a seed. And she was ready to bloom. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a pile of dusty boxes she'd avoided since her father's funeral. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and forgotten time. One box, heavier than the rest, bore her mother's name in faint black ink. Inside were letters, hundreds of them, addressed to her father but never sent. Her hands trembled as she opened one. "I couldn't stay, Daniel," it read. "Not after what you did." Emily's breath caught. Line after line revealed secrets long buried. Her father's betrayal, her mother's sorrow, the deep fracture that split their family. Her mother hadn't abandoned her. She had fled for survival. Emily folded the letter carefully, hands steady now. The narrative she had clung to all her life, of being unwanted, left behind, was no longer true. The room spun slowly, as Emily read more letters, each one peeling away layers of a truth she had never imagined. Her mother had tried to return, twice, but had been blocked. "Daniel told me you wouldn't understand," one letter said. "That you were better without me." The lie twisted in her chest. Her father, who'd died in silence, had protected his shame with control. He had loved her maybe, but his love was wrapped in guilt and fear. Emily leaned back, eyes to the ceiling, the letters fanned around her like broken feathers. This was grief in reverse. Not mourning a loss, but realizing the loss was never real. Her heart cracked open in a new place, not out of pain, but out of permission to finally feel it all. Emily stood in front of the mirror, her mother's final letter pressed against her chest. "Forgive him if you can, but forgive yourself first." The words felt like medicine and blade, all at once. She stared at herself. Same eyes as her mother, same furrow when she thought too deeply. For the first time she didn't see the abandoned daughter. She saw the woman who survived. The grief wasn't gone, but it had shifted. It no longer held her hostage. She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding for years. Her story wasn't broken, it had simply never been told right. Until now. Later, she lit a single candle on the windowsill and sat beside it, letter in hand. Outside, the city pulsed with life, unaware of the quiet revolution inside her. She read aloud the lines her mother had once written, her voice shaking but clear. With each word, she felt a heaviness lift, slowly, like fog parting after days of rain. She didn't need to rewrite the past. She only needed to honor its truth. "I forgive you," she whispered, to her mother, her father, herself. The flame danced, casting her shadow long against the wall. In that moment, Emily wasn't just mourning. She was unburdening. Emily stepped outside just before midnight, the letter now folded neatly in her coat pocket. The air was cool, almost kind. She walked toward the small park she hadn't visited since childhood. There, beneath the same willow tree where she once played, she sat in silence. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply existed, fully present, breath rising and falling. The pain was still there, but so was something else. Peace? Not quite. But the beginning of it. A whisper of wholeness. She looked up at the stars, their quiet certainty grounding her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel haunted. She felt here. Emily stood in her apartment's bathroom, staring at her reflection, her eyes shadowed but alive. She reached for a small wooden box on the shelf. Inside, her father's old wristwatch, and a crumpled photo of the three of them, faded from time and grief. She had avoided looking at it for years. Her thumb grazed her father's face in the photo. "You should have told me," she whispered. Her voice cracked, but not with anger, with sorrow. "I might have understood." The truth had come too late, but the wound no longer festered. It had begun to heal. She wasn't ready to forget. But she was ready to confront it, not with fire, but with breath. She lit incense and placed the photo on the windowsill. "This is where the silence ends," she said, the smoke rising in ribbons. She returned to the meditation cushion with no expectation. No need to silence her thoughts, no desperate search for clarity. She simply sat, spine tall, breath deep. The lotus pendant hung against her chest, a steady weight. Memories drifted through her mind, her father's silence, her mother's letters, her own spiraling grief. But this time she didn't run from them. She breathed through each image, each ache, as if bowing to the storm. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Not from sadness, but from surrender. The war within her, fought for years in silence, was dissolving into stillness. Her pain was not her enemy. It was her teacher. And she was finally listening. That evening, Emily found herself walking through the same neighborhood where she once watched her father fade away. The hospice loomed in the distance, quiet now, shuttered for renovation. She stopped at the gate, fingers gripping the cold metal bars. She didn't come for closure. She came to release. Closing her eyes, she whispered, "I forgive you." The wind picked up, warm and constant, as if carrying her words forward. There was no audience. No dramatic music. Just her, and a quiet promise to herself, to let go of what had held her down. Her forgiveness wasn't approval. It was freedom. As she walked away, the weight she had carried since childhood remained behind, crumbling like dust in the wind. She visited her mother's old address next, not expecting anyone, just needing to see the place. The small house stood unchanged, a faded yellow door, wind chimes still hanging. Emily stood there for minutes, letting the space speak to her. She imagined her mother there, writing, crying, surviving. The pain between them no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like consequence. And beneath it, love. She placed a single white lotus from the florist in front of the door, and bowed her head. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for the letters, or for leaving, but for surviving long enough to leave breadcrumbs." Emily didn't need to knock. The silence held all the answers now. That night, back in her apartment, Emily sat with the candle again. Only this time, there was no letter in her hand, no photo, no question. Just breath. Just presence. She pressed her palm to her heart, feeling its rhythm. "You're still here," she whispered to herself. Not broken. Not lost. Just here. The shadows in the room danced gently. She no longer needed to chase answers. She had lived her way into understanding. The Buddhist texts lay beside her, pages still marked by her mother's handwriting. She didn't need to read them tonight. The silence around her no longer scared her. It welcomed her. The transformation wasn't loud. It was sacred. Like breath. Like forgiveness. Like beginning again. A week had passed since Emily's final visit to her mother's old home. Her days had become quieter, not empty, but intentional. She now began each morning in stillness, lighting incense, bowing slightly, and offering gratitude, even for her pain. It wasn't about perfection, it was about presence. The ache was still there, but softer, no longer slicing. When a wave of memory hit, she no longer braced against it. She breathed with it. The lotus pendant now felt less like a relic of mystery, and more like a root, something sacred anchoring her. She wasn't healed. Healing was not a destination, but she was becoming whole, in the cracks. And that was enough. One afternoon, Emily received a letter from a cousin she hadn't spoken to in years. "I found something of your mom's," it read. Inside the envelope was a small photograph. Her mother seated beside a serene lake, eyes closed, fingers in a gentle mudra. On the back, her handwriting read, "Pieces not found, pieces remembered." Emily held the photo close to her chest, tears welling, not from pain this time, but from recognition. She realized then that her mother hadn't vanished into the void. She had chosen peace. And now, perhaps, so could Emily. The photo didn't reopen a wound. It gently kissed it closed. That evening, Emily took a slow walk through the neighborhood park. The same one from her childhood. Trees whispered above, and the soft rustle of life moved around her. She no longer felt like a visitor in her own story. She paused beside the willow tree, placed her hand on the bark, and smiled. Not for anyone else, just for herself. The wound had become a well. From it, she could draw strength. Not in spite of what she endured, but because of it. The stars peeked out through branches, ancient and unbothered. She whispered, "I'm still here." It was not defiance. It was reverence. Back home she began clearing space, letting go of what no longer served her. Old boxes, forgotten clothes, shelves filled with things that once numbed her pain. She didn't throw away the memories. She released the clutter around them. With each drawer emptied, a new breath entered the room. She played soft instrumental music, windows wide open, light pouring in. The space became less of a storage of sorrow, and more of a temple of healing. Her apartment no longer mirrored her grief. It mirrored her return. Her life didn't need to be rebuilt. It just needed to be met honestly, gently, like a wound bathed in morning light. That night she sat beside the candle again, this time not to mourn or search, but simply to be. No ghosts lingered. No echoes pressed. She placed the photograph of her mother and the lotus pendant beside the flame. "Thank you for not staying," she whispered. "And thank you for finding your peace." Her voice didn't shake. The candle flickered. Emily closed her eyes, hands resting over her heart, the silence cradling her like a lullaby. Tomorrow would come. Grief might visit again, but she would meet it with breath, with ritual, with space. Not to banish it, but to learn from it. She was not empty. She was awakening. The morning was still. No sound, no rush, just the hum of life waiting to begin. Emily sat on the rooftop of her apartment, a thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The city stretched before her, vast and quietly alive. Below, lives bustled, but up here, time moved slower. She sipped tea from her mother's old porcelain cup, the one she'd almost thrown away years ago. Steam curled gently into the air, rising like incense. There was no grand ceremony, no audience. Just breath, warmth, and sky. Emily didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence had become her prayer. Her stillness, once born from numbness, was now a conscious offering. She had arrived, not in perfection, but in permission. To be. To heal. To exist without fixing every fracture. She stood slowly, stretching, letting the air move through her. The breeze touched her face like a mother's palm. With deliberate steps, she walked to the edge of the rooftop, not dangerously but openly. Below her the world stirred. Children on bikes, a baker unlocking his door, a jogger slowing to check the sunrise. For the first time, she didn't feel above them. She felt among them. The spiritual and the ordinary had fused. Her suffering no longer set her apart. It had become her bridge. She smiled, not for appearance, not for performance, just because she could. Just because she was here. There was something sacred in simply witnessing the world with open eyes. She returned inside, sunlight trailing behind her like a gentle witness. The apartment, once haunted by grief, now exhaled calm. No more clutter, no more ghosts. Just the scent of sandalwood, the sound of birds, the glow of morning. On her table lay the photograph, the pendant, and a fresh white flower. She didn't need to write about the journey anymore. She had lived it. Every scar had found a story. Every silence had found its sound. Emily sat on the floor, legs folded, palms upturned, not seeking, not chasing. Just receiving. The space around her held a new kind of truth. That healing was never loud. It came softly, like a breath remembered. The scene shifts, a quiet montage of the life now unfolding. Emily walking barefoot through a garden, offering incense at a small shrine, laughing softly in the company of others, reading to children at a community center. No narration overlays these images, just music and breath and color. She plants seeds, but not just in soil. In hearts. In hearts. In silence. In second chances. Her life does not look perfect. It looks real. Rooted. Awake. The camera lingers on her smile as she tends to a small sapling. She does not look back. She does not need to. The story isn't about return. It's about remembering and living forward from the deepest truth. She is no longer lost. The camera slowly returns to Emily, seated once more beside the candle, night settling in again. The world has turned. And so has she. Her eyes are closed, but her face glows with the quiet strength of someone who has touched the center of their suffering and emerged with light. Her breath deepens. No words are spoken now. Just a single thought, echoing not from the mouth, but from the soul. You cannot escape the storm, but you can become the stillness inside it. The candle flickers once, then steadies. Fade to black.